In today's video, you're going to learn everything you need to know regarding if statements within JavaScript. So first things first, what even is an if statement? Well, an if statement will allow you to go down different paths in your program. You will have some condition in your program or something that evaluates to a true-false value. And if it is true, you're going to go down one path. And if it is false, you're going to go down a different path. So it's going to be if this condition is true, we'll go down this path. If it's not true, we're going to go down a different path. So they allow your programs to be more dynamic and go down different paths depending on a certain condition. Now, how do these if statements actually work in JavaScript? So let's look at some examples here. So on line 15, what I do is I define a constant called count, and I assign it to the value of 4. And then here on line 18, I write an if statement. So to write an if statement in JavaScript, you use the JavaScript keyword if, and then following that keyword, then you open up a pair of parentheses. So here's my left parenthesis and my right parenthesis. And between those parens here, that is where you write your condition. And this condition, it needs to be able to evaluate to a Boolean. So it could be some comparison. It could be like, is this value less than this value? Or is this value greater than this value or equal to? Or any other kind of operator that will evaluate to a true-false value. You could even check, does this object exist, or is it just an undefined value? And this is also where knowing truthy and falsy values can help you as well, as some values will be truthy and they evaluate to true when coerced to a Boolean, and some falsy and they evaluate to false when coerced to a Boolean. And I have a video that you can check out on truthy and falsy values. But for these if statements here, you use the if keyword, and then following the if keyword, you open up a pair of parentheses. Within those parentheses, you write some condition that evaluates to a true-false value. And then following that condition here, then you open up the body of your if statement. And you open up the body of an if statement much like you would open up the body of a function. You open up a pair of curly braces, and then you write some code that you want to occur if this condition is true. So if this condition is true right here, you are going to enter the body of your if statement and you are going to execute this code. But if this is false, you are never going to enter into this body of the if statement here. So if I run this program here, you're going to see that I get console logged. The count is less than 5. And the reason I get that is because my count is assigned to the value of 4. My condition checks if the count is less than 5. And that is true. So since that's true, it enters this if block here. Now, if I change this to 6, you're going to see when I run this, I don't get any output because my condition evaluates to false and I don't enter the curly braces of my if statement. All right. Now with if statements, you can also add on to them if something is not true. So here, I can write an else if statement. And what else if is it will first check this first condition. If the condition is false, it will then check your else if statements. So it's going to first say, okay, is this condition true? It is not true. So then it's going to go down, okay, well, if that's not true, is this condition true? So then it will check your next condition in your else if statement. So it's going to be if this condition is true, else, if this condition is true, then it's going to enter this block here. So in this scenario, when my count is 6, it is not less than 5, so it doesn't enter this block. But then I check, okay, is it less than 10? And it is less than 10. So I would expect it to enter this block and console log this output here. And as you can see, that's what it does. The count is greater than 4, but less than 10. So you can also chain on else if statements to your initial if statement. And I could chain on as many of these as I want to. I could be if, else if, else if, else if, and keep going down forward and writing more and more conditions. Now, similarly, we also have an else block in JavaScript, in which the else block, you don't write a condition for the else block, and this will run automatically if all of your other conditions are false. So this will run, as you can see, it has no condition following the else keyword, and it will run if these two conditions are false, we will automatically run this else block. So in this scenario, we don't run it because this condition right now is true. So it only runs this. And when you're using these if statements in general alongside these else if statements, you're only going to enter one of these blocks no matter what. So let me show you how this works. So for example, let me change this to 4 here. And what you're going to see is I enter my first if block, but I don't enter any of the other blocks. I log out, the count is less than 5. And then if I change this to 6, you're going to see I only enter the second block. The count is greater than 4, but less than 10. And then if I put 12 in here, you're going to see that I only am going to enter my else block here at the end. So I run it, the count is greater than 9. So that is how you write an if statement with chaining on else if and else statements as well. Now, you can also have multiple conditions in the parens. You could have several conditions in the parens. So an example of this, I can check, is my count less than 5? And is my count greater than 0? If so, enter this block. But if both of these conditions don't evaluate to true, it will not enter this block. So in my scenario here, let me get rid of this. My count is 12, so it's not going to enter this block. So I run this, and you're going to see I get nothing outputted. Now, if I make my count 4, so that is less than 5 and greater than 0, you can see I do get my console logged output. But if I change this to -1, it's no longer greater than 0. So my if condition here is going to evaluate to false, and it's still not going to enter this. So you could have several conditions within your parens, and your overall condition still needs to evaluate to true if you want to enter your if block. Now, one thing I do want to mention with if statements is that I tend to prefer using early returns compared to just using if statements. So let me show you what that looks like here. So let's say that you have some function, and right here, I create a function called getCount. And in my getCount function, it sets up one parameter here. So it's going to take an argument of count, and it's going to first check, is the count less than 5? If that's true, we're going to return the string, the count is less than 5. And then we're going to check, if the count is less than 10, we're going to return the count is greater than 4 and less than 10. And if the count is not less than 10, we're going to just return the count is greater than 9. So this is kind of the very same thing I was doing earlier. But what it's effectively doing here is if this condition is true, it's going to hit this return statement, and it's never going to execute this code. And same thing here. If this is true, it's going to hit this return statement and never execute this code. And if neither of these are true, this is kind of acting as an else block, and it's just going to return this. And the reason I like this is because for me personally, I feel like this is actually quite a bit more readable compared to doing something like this up here. Like when you're using if, else, you kind of have to, I feel like it just takes more mental overhead to reason about what's going on here. Okay, we're first checking if it's less than 5, and then if that's not true, we're going to check this. But in this function here, I feel like it's very straightforward to just do if the count is less than 5, we're going to just hit this return statement, nothing else happens. And then if the count is less than 10, same thing. Else, if neither of those true, we're just going to return here. So to me, that actually makes a little bit more sense and is a little bit easier to reason about. So if we call this function with some different counts, so if we call it with 4, I get the count is less than 5. Now, if we call it with 7, what you'll see is the count is greater than 4, but less than 7. So it enters this block here. And then if we call it with a larger number here, what you'll see is the count is greater than 9. So I effectively get the same result, but I just think for the sake of readability, this makes a little bit more sense here. So for if statements in JavaScript, if statements allow you to go down different paths of your program depending on whether a certain condition is true or false. And you write if statements by first using the if keyword in JavaScript, and then you open up a pair of parentheses, and within those parentheses, you plug in your condition. And if that condition is true, you will enter the body of your if statement, which is between these curly braces here. And you will run whatever code you place in that body of the if statement. Now, if that is not true, you can also chain on else if statements. So if the first condition isn't true, then you could say else if, and then just write another condition. And if that is true, it's going to enter the else if block. And then with if statements, you can also add an else statement in which if none of your if or else if statements are true, then it will enter your else block. Now, if statements between the parentheses, you can have multiple conditions. So you're not restricted to just using one condition. It could be several conditions. And if the overall condition evaluates to true, you will still enter the if block. Now, me personally, if it makes sense in the program, I prefer to just use early returns and just use basic if statements and check a condition and just return early if that evaluates to true, as I think that's a little bit more readable, but that is kind of subject to what your preferences are and what the preferences of your team and your style guide is. So coming soon, we have while loops, switch statements, ternary expressions, so make sure you're subscribed for that, and I will see you in that next one.